I got to the water that morning with no different expectations than any other day. Same tackle box, same reel I always use, the same confidence of someone who's hooked hundreds of fish before. But there was a moment, right on the first cast, when I felt the line catch against the rod ring in a strange way. A barely noticeable sound, a kind of friction that shouldn't have been there at all. It was only afterward, taking a closer look at my own gear, that I realized something. I'd been carrying 7 small mistakes for years. None of them looked serious on their own. Together, though, they explained every fish that got away, every strike that never connected, every quiet day on the water that should have been full of action. This is about what I found that morning, and how fixing each one of those details completely changed the outcome of my fishing trip on that very same afternoon. Sport fishing today brings together millions of people around the world, spread across 3 main branches: freshwater fishing, saltwater fishing, and fly fishing. Each of these disciplines carries its own world of equipment, technique, and species behavior. And it's precisely in choosing and fine-tuning that equipment that the difference lives between a good day and a quietly frustrating one. I always believed that fishing well came down to patience and reading the water. It was right when I started questioning my own rod that I understood something else. Gear talks to the fish before you even notice it. Every poorly tied knot, every wrong weight, every rod with the wrong action is, in some way, whispering the wrong signals down where the fish decides whether to bite or move on. I'll walk you through the 7 adjustments I made that day, one by one, in the order I noticed each problem. This isn't a list of memorized rules. It's the account of someone who fished the wrong way for years without knowing it, and found out, in practice, just how much small details matter on the water. The first problem showed up before I'd even made my first cast. Every rod has what's called an action, basically the part of it that bends under pressure, whether you're casting or setting the hook. A fast action rod bends mostly in the top third, near the tip. A medium action rod bends from about the middle, and a slow action rod bends all the way from the lower third through to the tip. I'd been using, without realizing it, a fast action rod for a type of fishing that called for exactly the opposite. Slower, more forgiving rods work much better when you're casting light lures or handling softer mouth species, because they absorb the impact better and forgive small timing mistakes. Fast action rods, on the other hand, demand more precision and deliver more power, which makes them ideal for solid hook sets and long-distance casts. When I switched to a rod with an action that actually matched what I was doing on that water, the difference in the cast was immediate. The rod started loading the weight naturally, without that extra effort I'd always just assumed was normal. The second detail I fixed was rod length. There's a simple logic behind it. A longer rod casts farther for the same effort, but loses practicality in tight spaces. A shorter rod, on the other hand, delivers more lifting power, which makes it perfect for fighting big fish in confined spaces, like on a boat. I was in an environment that called for distance, but I was using a rod built for boat fishing, short and overly stiff for what I actually needed. The moment I corrected that, I gained extra meters on the cast without any added effort, just from matching the right tool to the right setting. The third adjustment was the line, and this one might have surprised me the most. I'd always used monofilament out of habit, without ever questioning whether it was the best choice for every situation. Monoline has a real advantage. It stretches, which absorbs shock when you set the hook and fight the fish. But that same stretch means less sensitivity, less direct contact with what's happening down below. Braided line is a different story. It has a much thinner diameter for the same strength, which helps it cut through current and wind more efficiently. And since it barely stretches at all, contact with the fish becomes far more direct. You feel every movement, every hesitation, every touch on the bait before you even consciously register it. I switched the line that day, and what changed wasn't how many fish touched the bait. It was how many of those touches I finally managed to notice in time. This is a small mistake that adds up over time. When you're using lures that spin in the water, certain metal lures that rotate as you retrieve them, without a swivel at the end of the line, twist builds up with every single cast. Over time, that twist forms spontaneous knots, weakens the entire line, and even throws off the lure's natural presentation underwater. The fix is simple. Use a good quality swivel between the main line and the terminal tackle. That small component spins freely within its own body, letting the lure rotate without passing that twist onto the rest of the line. Once I added that detail to my rig, the lure started working much more cleanly, moving naturally, almost as if it were swimming on its own. I'll admit this was the most embarrassing mistake to own up to. I used to tie my knots quickly, without paying attention to details that seemed irrelevant, like wetting the knot before pulling it tight. That simple step, moistening the line before the final cinch, prevents excess friction between the wraps, which generates heat and weakens the fiber right at the point where it needs the most strength. The hook set. A basic knot, like the one joining the line to a hook or a swivel, needs firm wraps, properly aligned tag ends, and that final careful pull. Firm, but unhurried. I retied every knot on my rig that day with extra attention, and the confidence that gave me was almost as valuable as the technical improvement itself. The sixth adjustment involves something I used to treat as a minor detail: the weight on the rig. Weights serve several purposes in the water: anchoring bait to the bottom, setting the depth of a float, helping bait roll naturally with the current, or helping a lure sink faster. And each weight shape behaves differently depending on how strong the current is. I'd been using a generic weight, without thinking about that day's specific current. The result was a bait that kept getting dragged the wrong way, far from where the fish were actually feeding. I switched to a weight designed to grip the bottom against the current and release easily on the retrieve. The bait finally stayed exactly where it needed to, steady, anchored in the right spot. The last mistake I found was, maybe, the subtlest of them all. When casting, especially with heavier lures and weights, there's a recommended distance between the rod tip and the bait before you start the casting motion. When that distance is too short, the cast loses both power and accuracy. The bait doesn't carry enough momentum, and the weight ends up flying out uncontrolled, without a clear trajectory. I adjusted that gap, giving the right amount of space between the rod tip and the terminal tackle before starting the cast, and the improvement in control was immediate. Instead of muscling the cast to make up for poor technique, I was finally able to place the bait exactly where I was aiming. 7 small adjustments. None of them looked decisive on their own, but together, they completely rewrote how my bait behaved underwater, how the fish perceived it, and how clearly I could feel every movement that used to slip right past me. That afternoon turned out unlike anything I'd experienced before on that same stretch of water, at roughly the same spot, around the same time of day as always. The rod carried the right weight, the line responded clearly to every touch, the swivel let the lure work freely, the knots held with complete confidence, and the weight kept everything exactly where it needed to be. What changed wasn't luck. It was paying attention to 7 details I'd been overlooking for years, assuming they were too small to matter. That's one of the fascinating things about fishing. It doesn't forgive poorly tuned gear, but it rewards generously anyone willing to take a closer look at their own setup before blaming the water, the weather, or the fish. If you recognized any of these 7 mistakes in your own rig, don't worry, it took me years to notice them too. What matters now is the next cast, with the right adjustments in hand. Tell me which of these 7 mistakes you've made yourself, or which one you're going to fix first on your next trip out.